Hi, everyone. I'm Liz Voiles, and I'm Communications Lead for the Center for Election Innovation and Research. Thanks so much for joining us. During this webinar, you'll learn more about the Election Official Legal Defense Network from the project's leadership, staff, and 2 Michigan election officials who have received services from the Election Official Legal Defense Network. Today, you're going to hear from David Becker, who's Executive Director of the Center for Election Innovation and Research, Ben Ginsberg, Co-Chair of the Election Official Legal Defense Network, Bob Bauer, who is the other Co-Chair of EOLDN, Aghogho Edevbie, Deputy Secretary of State of Michigan, Justin Roebuck, County Clerk and Registrar of Deeds from Ottawa County, and Angie Pitha, who is Project Lead of EOLDN. After you hear from the speakers, you'll be able to ask questions. Now you'll hear from David Becker.
Thanks, Liz. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And it's really great to have such a great panel for the discussion. For those of you that don't know me, I am David Becker. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Election Innovation and Research. We are a nonpartisan nonprofit based in Washington, D.C. that works with election officials all over the country of both parties to help you promote and secure elections that voters should trust and do trust. And we know the last several years have been particularly challenging for all of you as you've done that. We founded CEIR back in 2016. And I've been working in elections for about 25 years. I used to be a voting rights attorney with the Department of Justice under both the Clinton and W. Bush administrations. I led the Pew elections team for several years and led the effort to create the Electronic Registration Information Center while I was there, as it's otherwise known, and then founded CEIR. In the 25 years I've worked in elections, I don't think I've ever seen a period of time that's more challenging than what election officials have been through over the last 3 and more years. I'm so respectful of all the work that you've done, despite all of the challenges, despite all of the disinformation. Election officials all over the country, in Michigan and elsewhere, often under very difficult circumstances, put on elections that have repeatedly and constantly withstood extreme scrutiny, supporting the idea that I know is true, that the last couple of elections, 2020, 2022, were some of the most secure, transparent elections we've ever had. And that's really thanks to the work you all do every day to give voters a voice in our democracy. But despite all of that, we also saw, beginning in 2020, unprecedented levels of abuse and harassment and even threats being directed at public servants, at you all, people who do the work of democracy, often without much thanks or credit. And that spurred some conversations amongst my team, and that led me to the next 2 people I'll introduce you to, Ben Ginsberg and Bob Bauer, who came up with the idea for the Election Official Legal Defense Network. We're very proud to put that idea into motion, but it's really the brainchild of Ben and Bob. Ben Ginsberg, as many of you might know, is a longtime Republican election lawyer and was counsel to the W. Bush and Romney campaigns. And Bob Bauer is a longtime Democratic election lawyer and counsel to President Biden's campaign and to President Obama. With that, I'd like to introduce, I'm just incredibly grateful that they both were able to join us for the call today. So Ben, why don't I hand it over to you first to speak, and then we'll go to Bob after that.
Very good, David. Thank you, and hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this today. And let me echo what David said about the way the elections have worked over the past couple of cycles and the really important and incredible job that election officials have done. To give you a little bit of our history, Bob and I were political adversaries in the trenches for a good 30 years. But we came together after the 2012 election to work on the Presidential Commission on Election Administration, which produced a number of best practices and suggestions that we were gratified to see many of you implement after a huge amount of help from all of you and from academics as well. That commission, I think, and I hate to talk for Bob, but always love to, gave us a great deal of insight and really appreciation for the incredible work that election officials do in putting on elections and making sure they work correctly. Based on that experience, when we saw so many election officials come under unjust threats and legal actions, we decided, with David and CEIR's great help, to form the Election Officials Legal Defense Network to provide pro bono help to election officials that need it. We're very proud of this work and for what's been accomplished by EOLDN. And it's my pleasure to turn it over to Bob for a bit more description on what we've done. Bob?
Thank you very much, Ben. And I appreciate the opportunity to participate in the call. I'm traveling today, so I'm joining you by audio rather than video. But first, I want to thank Ben for joining me in this enterprise, and certainly for David and his team for the extraordinary work that they've done to bring this conception into day-to-day execution. What has been striking for us is that when we set out, we had in mind that we would recruit a nationwide network of lawyers and law firms. And we had some goals in mind, but they were general and I think set as modestly as possible. As it turns out, the call, and it's been a completely nonpartisan call, has been met by hundreds of lawyers around the country, a couple of dozen law firms, and we do genuinely now have national reach. And the program enables us to pair pro bono counsel with election officials who have a range of needs that need to be met that fall into the category that Ben just described, and allow them to build attorney-client relationships with those pro bono lawyers in defense of the work that they do, their professionalism, the systems that they run. So it actually has developed into, I suppose you could say, one of the largest law firms devoted to this particular purpose, and the only law firm devoted exclusively to this purpose in the country. It's a legal network that is dedicated to the defense of the work that professional election administrators do, that is designed to be professional and free of political interference. And I should add here something that harkens back to the point that Ben made about our prior work on the Presidential Commission on Election Administration. They're a bipartisan and a fully bipartisan panel, and it was composed of people who had technical expertise, concluded, as it was expressed in the report, that election administration is a facet of public administration. It is a high-level management task that requires technical skills, experience, and sophistication. And that is what we're defending in the election administration, the Election Official Legal Defense Network. And there are many, many lawyers around the country, more being recruited all the time, who are on hand to be helpful toward that end. And again, on a fully nonpartisan basis. So I'm really grateful to be part of this. Thank everybody at EOLDN and at CEIR for making this possible. And thank you for attending. David?
Thanks, Bob, and thanks, Ben. This wouldn't have happened without their leadership. They've been leaders in this field, as they mentioned, for decades, even when they have their respective partisan hats on, the ability to come together and elections truly more secure and more accessible for all eligible voters. And this is just the latest in that effort. And so thanks again for all of your leadership in this. I now want to hand it over to someone you probably know pretty well, Deputy Secretary of State Aghogho Edevbie, who, although a fairly recent addition to the Secretary of State's office, has a lot of experience as an attorney in voting rights and elections, as you well know. And he's going to talk a little more about the national environment right now and how Michigan fits into that. Take it away, Mr. Deputy Secretary.
Thank you so much for having us. I know Justin and I are really thrilled to be the local representation here. And of course, we're all coming together to talk about the various challenges that clerks and election officials across this country are facing right now. And in Michigan, it's rather unique that we've had kind of 3 cycles in a row where there have been significant changes and challenges to our clerks. In 2018, Proposal 3 was passed that changed the laws to allow for no reason absentee voting and same-day voter registration. Massive change. And then in 2020, we obviously had a lot of disinformation and misinformation and attacks and threats against local elected officials and election officials throughout the state. And then in 2022, we had Proposal 2 pass, which also changed election law pretty drastically with the implementation of early voting, which will be taking place early next year. So our clerks in Michigan have really been on the front lines and have been carrying the torch for their voters. And we really want to say from the department's perspective that we are gratified to have their support in this work. And we are standing shoulder to shoulder with them to make sure that they have what they need to carry out their duties. But in the national context, we have, of course, seen, recently the fentanyl-laced letters, people trying to threaten people's lives. We, of course, had, Tina Barton face some threats locally back in 2020. Chris Swope has faced threats. And, of course, my boss, Jocelyn Benson, famously faced some threats where a mob stormed on her house, trying to threaten her to get her to overturn the election results. And these threats are, continue. We continue to get folks who show up to the department's office in the Austin building in Lansing, demanding answers that we know have been answered repeatedly. And of course, the Secretary of State worked with the Attorney General Dana Nessel on the recent charges against some folks who interfered with the election process and trying to seize and seizing illegally election equipment. So we are constantly under the gun here. Fortunately, we've taken some proactive steps with the passage of HB 4129, the election intimidation bill, to hopefully support election officials across the state to make it clear that any threats or intimidation or harassment of election officials while they're performing their duties is illegal. And we are committed to just making sure that that act is implemented flawlessly. It's going to be signed by the governor within the next couple of days. But we certainly have an environment that continues to be challenging, and we're thankful to you, David, Ben, and Bob, for all the work that you do to ensure that we're able to carry out our duties in a forthright way. So thanks, David.
Thanks, Aghogho. And it's, I think you raised such an important point, which is there's so much work being done around elections in Michigan and nationwide. Things are changing. There are improvements being made constantly. We know the work and life of an election official can be difficult, even in the most challenging of circumstances, as we head into presidential election that's likely going to have very high turnout and a lot of scrutiny and interest again. And the work becomes all the much more difficult when there's harassment or abuse being levied at the professionals who run elections, or even threats. That's why we created the Election Official Legal Defense Network. We work to recruit a nationwide network of attorneys who are ready to assist any election official pro bono at no cost to themselves. If they need any kind of advice about a situation that they're dealing with and they don't feel like they're getting help from other sources, to assist them in protecting their personal safety if that's necessary, and even to provide communications assistance if they feel like if it can be helpful. And to get into how all of that works, I want to hand it over to Angie Pitha of the CEIR team, who is our project lead on the Election Official Legal Defense Network. She's a barred attorney. She has worked in election offices in the past. She understands this work, and she's just done a remarkable job of building the network out to where it is today. So Angie, I'm going to hand it over to you to explain how all this works if an election official ever needs assistance.
Thank you so much, David. And I wanted to thank everyone who has joined us today. We certainly hope that you take this information that you've learned today and spread it with your colleagues, because we know that the need is great and will certainly impact the 2024 election processes for the whole country, and in particular Michigan. We're well aware of the issues that the state and individuals have faced that the Deputy Secretary touched on. I want to first say to Bob, I have never thought that I would end up helping to run a law firm before, but we're doing it. But I also wanted to tell all of you out there that, David mentioned the fact that I've worked elections myself, and I have been in shoes just like yours. I live in Denver, Colorado, and I worked for the Denver, Colorado Elections Division. My tenure there, so I was a seasonal employee, and my tenure started in 2018, which was an exciting, busy, and challenging atmosphere, but pretty safe, all things considered. And my last one that I worked was last year, 2022, and the changes are so stark and terrible in terms of the isolation and the fear that have been brought to bear on election officials who are simply trying to do their jobs. We felt it in Denver, just like you feel it in Michigan, just like the whole country has felt it. If anyone in your position would like to avail themselves of our services, please reach out to us. I'm going to dive into now about how EOLDN does work and how you or your colleagues can ask for our services if you ever need them. There's two services. The first is the legal help. We talked about that. The second one is help with communications, because I mentioned the problems stem with mis and mal communication. Later on, the Deputy Secretary will talk about how Michigan is one of our current communications clients, but that's the state of Michigan, and we're open to receive more requests, of course, from your different townships and counties. What is EOLDN? EOLDN connects election officials, such as you, in need of advice or assistance with licensed, qualified pro bono attorneys and communications professionals. They are standing by. They're ready to help you free of charge. We're very happy to provide this matching service to you at no charge to you. This service will help you address issues related to elections or to election administration on behalf of your county or office or agency, or in your individual capacity. If you are finding yourself being isolated and threatened, and you feel like you could benefit from having your own legal counsel, this is what EOLDN was set up to do. We will take your requests and see how we can help you, whether it's legal or communications. Let me talk a little bit about who is eligible for these services. We're happy to broaden our service and make it eligible for all current and former United States election officials, including election administrators and poll workers. So whether you're paid, unpaid, staff, or a volunteer or seasonal worker such as I was, we can take a request from you and see how we can help you. And of course, it's regardless of political affiliation. That does not matter to us. As a public charity, CEIR may not participate in or intervene in any political campaign on behalf of or in opposition to candidates for public office. One more thing that I wanted to mention is that we do not help partisan actors. So if you are acting under the supervision of a political party, the service is not meant for that type of person. It is meant for persons such as yourselves who work under recognized election authorities and administer elections. If you or any of your colleagues have received threats, you may follow this process that you see on your screen. You may submit your request at EOLDN.org. So that's the acronym for Election Official Legal Defense Network. And And we're very happy to look at it. We welcome requests from you and other people that are eligible across the country. We will then review your request and look for the appropriate match to help you with your situation. Depending on your request, we may match you up with an attorney or with our communications professionals. Again, this help is free of charge and tailored for you and what you would need to combat these threats, combat interference with your duties, and stay on the job, hopefully, and keep doing the great work that you do. When you visit EOLDN.org, I also encourage you to sign up for our monthly newsletter. The newsletter will provide EOLDN updates and give you ways to contact us. We thank you so much for joining us today. And again, we ask for you to share this far and wide with anyone that is in your election community, whether it is within Michigan or beyond. And thank you so much for joining us today. Now, David will introduce our next speaker.
Thanks, Angie. And as Angie mentioned, it's become clear to us, we work nationally across the country with election officials of both parties, and we can tell you that the amount of abuse and harassment and threats, if you're feeling that, you have a lot of your colleagues who feel something very similar. You're not alone. It's happening all over the country. It's happening in swing states and also states that are not swing states at all. It's happening in red states and blue states, as well as purple states. It's happening at the state level. It's happening at the county level. It's happening at the local level. It's even happening to poll workers in some cases. And it's one of the things that drives us to continue to do this work. And also makes it really important that you all know that there's a community of organizations and people and your colleagues who understand what you're dealing with, understand the challenges you have, and have your back. We're ready to help you in any way that we possibly can, and EOLDN is a big part of that if you need that assistance. I now want to go to hand it off to someone I've gotten to know much better and is someone I just have a tremendous amount of respect for, one of the best county election officials in the country, Justin Roebuck from Ottawa County, Michigan. You all probably know him quite well. He is emblematic of the work that so many of you do on a daily basis, just tireless in his efforts, acts completely in a nonpartisan way in the performance of his duties. And the voters of Ottawa County are incredibly lucky to have him. And he's going to talk a little bit about what he has personally seen and spoken to his colleagues about that are happening out in Michigan and elsewhere. So Justin, I'll hand it off to you right now.
Thank you so much, David. Really appreciate you, Bob and Ben, and really, your entire team for bringing this together. I really think it's such an important opportunity to just share a little bit about what's happening, what are some of the resources available to us. And if you're on this call listening in, we've probably met. We certainly, election administration is a small universe, particularly in the state of Michigan, and we probably talked before at a conference, and you're probably a friend of mine, and I'm just so grateful for the opportunity that we've had to be able to build that community amongst ourselves as election administrators. I've been an administrator in elections for 14 years now at the county level, and it's incredible for me to think about the changes that just I have experienced. And honestly, in 14 years, maybe sounds like a lot, but I don't think so. I mean, there's certainly professionals who've been doing this a lot longer, but just in that time frame, the amount of change that we have witnessed, as Aghogho was talking about, some of the legislative change and some of the really watershed changes in our process, that's one set of challenges and opportunities for us as election officials. But very, very clearly over the past 5 years, I really have sensed a major shift in public confidence in our process in a major way, where the level of scrutiny on our offices is so intense that it goes beyond the obvious public need for us to be transparent, and it becomes this harassment type of mentality, and it's been really a challenge to do our work under that kind of a spotlight is extremely challenging. And I think it just really points out to me the deep need that we have for a community of resources, whether that's each other as election officials. I mean, I don't know how many times, I cannot even count, even in the past 10 months, that I've picked up the phone or texted somebody in the election administration field and said, hey, I need some advice here. What would you do, or how do you handle this? But also, to me, it's an incredible relief to recognize that there are resources outside of our, universe of election officials. Ultimately, the changes that have happened over the past few years have necessitated that we look at our jobs differently. I've talked a lot about this. I feel like over the past, 25, 30 years, election officials are nerds, right? We're down in the weeds of details. We're data driven. Our entire function and job focuses on, process and data. And that's how it should be. But the past few years have necessitated that we also be communications experts, that we also explain to the public in a way that they can understand what we are doing and how we're making things happen. And I don't discredit the public for that. I mean, most, as I call them, most normal human beings don't think about the inner workings of how an election office works until they are presented with incorrect information that they suddenly have to deal with and navigate and try to figure out, well, is this true or is that true? So we have to be better at our communication. And the other thing that we've seen, particularly actually in the wake of the 2020 election, in my personal experience and the experience of a lot of my colleagues that I've talked to, is the need for legal help. I mean, I don't think I ever would have thought 5 or 6 years ago that I would be in the place where I'm like, I think I need a lawyer. I think I need some help here. I don't know the answers to some of these questions. And I'm just so very grateful to be a part of an organization like EOLDN and have the privilege of serving on the advisory board, and just the knowledge that there are actively so many people, not only in our community, but across the country, who are professionals who recognize, professionals in other fields, right? Communications and law, who recognize the need, the ongoing need that we have in a democratic system to be able to function well as election administrators. And these people have been willing to step up and to give their time and to give their resources to say, wait a minute, we can't let this go. We can't allow, this critical piece of our infrastructure to go underserved. And I'm so grateful for the leadership that David's exhibited, and particularly for Ben Ginsberg and Bob Bauer, who have stepped up to the plate as well to really just navigate a very, very changing climate. And for us, it means everything. I think the other thing I would say too is one of the biggest impacts for me getting to know David and getting to, participate in conversations with him and others has been the recognition that, and I think David, you just said it earlier, we are not alone. It's so amazing to me when you go through some of the struggles that we've been through over the past couple of years, and the fatigue, the actual fatigue of having to do a job with long hours and with high demands and with high scrutiny and high stress, day in and day out for a number of years. That wears on you. And I think you begin to feel like, wow, am I cut out for this? Am I inadequate? I think one of the guys I've been able to get to know over the past couple of years is Bill Gates, who was a board chair, of course, in Maricopa County. And there's a really powerful article in the Washington Post several months ago that just profiled Bill and the personal struggles that he went through as an election official. And I'm so grateful. Like, I don't have exactly the same stories. I wasn't getting the death threats he was getting, but what really struck me with that article was how many of the things that I could relate to, and just the immediate recognition that man, we're all going through the same struggles, and I think we have to stick together. And I'm really grateful for the resources of EOLDN and helping us to do that.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. I mean, it is a sad truth that the job has gotten a lot more complicated, and it has taken, and some of the abuse has taken its toll. I'm glad you mentioned Bill Gates. He's he and you all, and the hundreds of thousands of professional election workers that our nation relies upon all year long. I mean, we all know, you working in elections know, you don't wake up on the Monday before a presidential election and put it on. I mean, there's work going on all day long. I know Justin had a long night last night. I know that there's this is happening in odd numbered years and even numbered years all the time. And then to be threatened or abused or harassed, not because you did your job poorly, because you did your job very well. And because that job that you did stood all the scrutiny, that you somehow managed the highest turnout in American history, the highest turnout in Michigan history, in the middle of a global pandemic. One of those great achievements that we don't talk about enough. And I think we should talk about it a lot more. And so, again, to another point Justin raised, if you have any question that you think a lawyer might be able to help with that relates to your official, where you might not be getting help from your or local lawyers, where you might not know where to turn, that's what EOLDN is for. Do not, if you're not sure if it's covered, go ahead and fill out a request anyway. If it's outside the scope, we won't help. We won't get you a lawyer to help you close on the purchase of a new house. But if it's anything related to your official duties, we're going to be there for you. So please go on with that. And then as we talk to election officials all over the country over the past 3 years, one of the things that continued to come up was the need for communications assistance, that this space has gotten just a lot more challenging, that there's constant disinformation being hurled about elections, and that assistance could be useful for election officials who are already under-resourced to either deal with a particular crisis that might have come up or a particular piece of disinformation, or just to plan for the future so they're better prepared knowing what might be coming up. And I'm going to turn it back to you, Aghogho, if I can, to talk a little bit about the communications assistance, because the state of Michigan has taken advantage of this, and this is something that's available. These are not volunteers, I should stress. We have retained a communications firm who will pair you with, who will give you assistance if it's something that can help you deal with something that you're addressing, that your current resources don't help with. So Aghogho, I'm going to hand it back to you for a little bit to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, thank you. And we've certainly been appreciative of the communications assistance that we've gotten, because we have a lot on our plate at the state level, as do all the clerks who are on this call, and as of course Justin has just outlined. But I want to focus on two areas where the help has been particularly great. The 14th Amendment issue. As you all know, the Secretary went through a deliberative process when this issue started to become really known to all of us and front and center this summer, with whether the former President Donald Trump should appear on the Michigan presidential primary ballot. And ultimately, she decided that she did not have the legal authority, absent a court order, to remove him from the presidential ballot. And we were very grateful that the Court of Appeals decided to uphold that view that the Secretary rightly had. But in reframing that decision and making sure that it was amplified in the way that it needed to be, so that everyone was aware of the decision, we really got a lot of help and support and getting best practices and some tips for national outreach, which we were grateful to have. The other piece that we've really leaned on EOLDN for has been really around AI. AI is, of course, a new and growing threat with deep fakes and the spread of misinformation and disinformation. we really have to be on top of our game this coming election cycle to ensure that we're getting the appropriate information out there and that we're getting ahead of these threats ahead of time. And Secretary Benson has really been a true leader on this, both in Michigan with helping to get through these recent bills, HB 5141 to 5145, but also nationally with her recent appearances in Washington for Senator Schumer's sessions. But with that, we have to amplify her voice, and that has been a real thing that we've helped gotten assistance for on the communications front and facilitating up to I think 6 national interviews, really helping to get the word out on this. So we are continue to be really grateful for all the work that David, Ben, and Bob and the whole entire team do to really help us amplify and put in place some good national best practices for our communication team. Thanks.
That's great. Thanks, Aghogho. Liz, do I hand it back to you now for questions?
Indeed, you do. So everyone, it's time for you to gather up your questions and put them in the Q&A box. We have a wonderful panel here who can answer them all. So if you hover over the bottom of your screen, you'll see that Q&A option pop up, and you just click on it and you can type in your question. Don't type them into the chat. Use the Q&A, please. And just identify where you are from when you ask your question, and I'll read it out loud. So the first question that we have, I think, is for David, and it's from Genevieve Scott. And Genevieve asks, are the services offered anonymously?
That's a great question, Genevieve. The answer is yes, you make a request through EOLDN. CEIR and EOLDN will never disclose your identity if you make a request. Some election officials have chosen to indicate that to talk about their experience, and that's totally up to you. It is whether you want to talk about it or not is up to the election official who makes the request. We do not share that with anybody, and we think that's really important. We pair the attorney up with you at that point, and then you have once you've been paired successfully, you have an attorney-client relationship with that attorney that we don't get in the middle of. So we don't even get in the middle, in between the advice that you might receive from a volunteer attorney. We stay out of that entirely. We just try to provide you with whatever support you need to get that legal assistance.
Okay, next question is from Connie Langland. Can EOLDN help with the increasing FOIA requests made to election offices, David?
Yeah, let me take that one too. I mean, so this is something we're hearing from election officials all over the country. They are being inundated by duplicative and irrelevant requests. Often the people making the requests don't understand what they're asking for. The things that they're demanding wouldn't be able to demonstrate fraud even if it existed, but it does take up, we know from talking to so many of you and your colleagues, that it takes up so much of your bandwidth as you're trying to do the other important work of giving your voters a voice in the next election. We're looking at this very closely. We're going to be releasing a small research report on what some states are doing about that soon. And we'll circulate that around, and hopefully you'll circulate around amongst each other. And there are states that are considering ways to address that. And of course, this is a difficult balance. And I'm sure I know that Secretary Benson's office and others are thinking about this as well. They're well aware of this challenge. On the one hand, you want to be very respectful of the transparency that's necessary in this process. And I haven't heard a single election official ever say that voters shouldn't have access to public records, that there should be a rollback of transparency at all. Election officials are extremely transparent in everything they do, and it's necessary to do that. But on the other hand, they have a job to do. And so they're to think about ways in which we can balance the really important requirement of transparency, even if it's misplaced or based on misinformation or a misunderstanding, a complete misunderstanding in some cases of how elections are run, with the need to enable election officials to do their jobs. It's a good question. I don't have an answer for you specifically right now, other than to say we're doing research and we're going to put some research out on that. And we're talking amongst ourselves and with election officials to get a sense of the depth of the problem and how we can address it without impacting the important value of transparency.
Okay, great. Next question is from Elizabeth Szymanski. She's from Allendale, Michigan, which is in Ottawa County. And she asks what the panel feels is the greatest threat to election officials and workers in 2024, and how she, where she sits, could prepare for those now.
I'd probably like to hear from Justin and Aghogho and Bob on this, if they're still on, if they want to mention it. Here's one thing when I get asked about threats to the election process in 2024. Here's one thing I am not worried about. I am not worried about whether the election officials of this country are going to put on an election that is accessible to all eligible voters and withstands any scrutiny that's leveled at it by the losers of those elections. I have 100% confidence in that and the work that you all do in every single state, even with some of the attrition that's happened, even with some of the turnover, even with some of the ongoing threats and harassment that has happened. I know you will get the job done in 2024, just like you got the job done in 2022, and just like you got the job done in 2020 and every other election before and after. What I am worried about is the degree to which losing candidates, as they have in the past, candidates who have lost, will try to spread disinformation, try to engage in grift on voters who supported the losing candidate. They target their own voters. They target the millions of people who are sincerely and understandably disappointed in the outcome of an election. I should say, first of all, we've all been there. I don't care what your political party is. I don't care who you are, where you live. Everyone has voted for a candidate who has lost and been disappointed in that. And I understand that very much. And it actually upsets me to know that there are people getting rich, raising money, $25 off a Social Security check, off of people who voted for losing candidates, telling them lies. And I'm also worried about how those lies could incite violence. I think we're better prepared to protect you all, the professionals, the public servants, than ever before. But we're keeping an eye on this. This is why we all do the work that we do. Justin or Aghogho or Bob, I don't know if any of you would like to chime in.
Yeah, I just want to echo that. I think the core threat has really been the threat that has led to everything has been misinformation and disinformation. Misinformation and disinformation in 2020 led to a lot of distrust. There are a lot of folks who are, ordinary American citizens who now distrust the election system because of lies. And that's led to physical threats. So we really have to ensure and be proactive about getting out the message about what is actually fact and what is false, especially with the advent of early voting. Anytime you have something new, it's going to be confusing for some people. And that is going to be an avenue for folks who represent losing candidates, or folks who just want to undermine our electoral system, to spread lies. And so we really have to, I would encourage every single clerk on this chat, on this call, and certainly you'll have a partner in us and the Department of State, to come up with a communications plan of how to get out the facts so that your voters know what is real and what's not. Also, I think if you have a lot of absentee ballots, or you're thinking you will, I'd encourage you to take advantage of the new laws to pre-process and pre-tabulate your votes so that you can get out the results as quickly as possible after polls close. one of the biggest issues in 2020, and it's nobody's fault. We had a lot more absentee ballots, and absentee ballots take time. And that led to a delay in results, which led to a vacuum. And if we take advantage of these new tools, that hopefully we can, reduce the chances of delays, which are just to happen naturally. But it will help us really in tamping down on the disinformation, misinformation, which really leads to a whole host of problems.
Aghogho, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because it's such a positive development that under the leadership of the secretary and election officials throughout the state of Michigan, the legislature acted to give election officials the ability to pre-process ballots, count ballots faster, get those results out sooner, and lessen the amount of time in which disinformation can fester and potentially lead to chaos. It's really a model, and it's something that a few other states out there are struggling with right now, where the leadership hasn't quite been there. Justin or Bob, did you have anything else you wanted to add there?
I mean, I would just say, I honestly agree with both of you gentlemen. I think that is the biggest challenge that we're facing. I think to the point of, like, what can we do to prepare for this as election officials? Like, how do we combat this seemingly, like, sometimes I feel like you're a drop in an ocean of information, right? I feel like I trust information that comes from people that I trust. I am just as guilty of that as anybody. I mean, I think in human nature, we trust people, and we trust the information that they give us, or from a source that you trust. And I've made it my mission to be somebody that people trust in my community. I think the way that we can do that is through bold transparency, honest communication, admitting when we make mistakes, and preemptively getting information out. So from the standpoint of saying, like, we kind of know some of the ways in which targeted misinformation has been weaponized and used. How can we proactively get information out along those lines? I mean, just, using the example of that Aghogho was talking about election results getting delayed. We talked about that on our last small election. We talked about how, guys, results are going to be a little bit more delayed than they have been in past elections, because we're not electronically transmitting our results here. And for reference, here's a couple of articles that showcase what we're doing that's a little bit differently. And here's that kind of proactive information, I think, really can help. Because when the information and the source is out there and available already, then when the misinformation comes, or when a voter comes with a question, maybe because they've been given information by somebody that they trust, we can point to something that's already in existence and say, you know what, the last month we put out a press release about this and talked about this and that. And so I think that is one of the ways that we can effectively prepare for one of the biggest challenges that I think we're going to face in 24, which is, again, that notion of candidates who no longer like to concede, but we see this messaging of just like, well, it's the system that's rigged, or it's the election official. I think we can prepare for that.
And I think Bob is still in transit. Bob, if you want to interject, feel free anytime. Otherwise, we'll move on to the next question.
Okay. The next question is from Marie Wicks, who is from East Lansing, home of MSU. She wants to know if there's any communications that could be shared specifically with college students. She says to provide reassurance, because they are being targeted in Michigan by the quote, election integrity fund and force.
Yeah. I mean, this is again something we're seeing nationwide. It's not just college students. I mean, anytime people target particular populations for disinformation because they think it's going to help them with political outcomes, whether it's young voters or elderly voters, or voters of color, or rural voters, that's despicable. And It's important to get correct information out. We're not talking about political information. We're not saying, who anyone should be voting for, or why they should be voting for someone. We're talking about information about how to navigate the process. Every eligible voter should have an easy way to navigate the process. Michigan is a wonderful example of that. Again, thanks to all of the work that you do. Michigan has some of the most accurate voter lists in the country, thanks to the work that's been done over decades in Michigan. So Michigan voters should feel very secure that the outcomes are correct, and know that the system is very accessible in Michigan. Any eligible voter can vote almost any way that they want that's convenient to them, and know that their ballot is secure. With regard to college students specifically, this is a really good point, Marie, and I'm going to take it back to my team and thinking about this, because we haven't talked about this specifically yet, but this might be something that would be appropriate for communications assistants under EOLDN, and it might also be something that we might just work on at CEIR for in more general terms, because one of the things that's often hurled at voters, disinformation that's hurled at voters who might be able to claim more than one legal residence, and this isn't just young voters who might live in Ohio and go to college in Michigan. It might also be older voters who live in Michigan during the summer and another state during the winter. So this, and there might be a variety of different aspects to this, and there might be ways to claim legal residency. And of course, it's really important that every voter be eligible and registered and vote in only one place where they have residency. Now we know from looking at the data that is almost always done, that voter fraud is extremely rare when double voting does occur, thanks primarily to ERIC, which Michigan is a part of. It's identified, it's investigated, and it's prosecuted, and that's the way it should be. But with college students, being that residency might be an area where disinformation could be particularly targeted, it's something I'd like to go back and think about, so I really appreciate you bringing it up.
If I may, Marie and others on the call, this is the sort of idea that has an audience and a purpose, and it's starting to kind of gel as an idea. We encourage you to please submit that sort of idea to EOLDN through our request form on the website, and we'll take a look at it and see if we can provide resources to help out.
Okay, next question is from Michelle Stevenson from Roscommon. So she asks, with the communications assistants not being volunteers, does that mean that there is a cost for this assistance? And will information be available on the EOLDN website to assist with communications?
So yeah, good question, and apologies for not being clear on that. All of EOLDN services are offered free of charge to election officials when they can accept them legally under the laws of their state, which is in the majority of places. And that includes the communications assistance. We have retained a communications firm. It is communication led for whatever it's worth by the former campaign manager to the Mitt Romney campaign in 2012. And they do incredible work across the political spectrum, but they're particularly knowledgeable about elections. And we will pair you with a communications professional from that firm if you request the assistance. And that will be at no charge to your office. What we ask is, and this will be part of the intake, it should be for kind of a specific discrete project with an outcome at the end. So that, for instance, if you wanted to create a communications plan for 2024, that's a discrete outcome. If you're having a particular piece of disinformation that's difficult for your office, it may be related to false claims about a lack of transparency or things like that. I mean, those kinds of things are something that are also specific projects that can be dealt with. So go ahead and make a request. If we need clarification, we'll get back to you, but there's absolutely no cost to you.
Okay, to be respectful of everyone's time, we're going to wrap up the Q&A, but David will give a couple closing remarks, and he'll go over how to get in touch with us after we hang up if you have any remaining questions.
Yeah, so thank you for all of your efforts, and we want to enlist you to help spread the word about this to your colleagues. EOLDN services are available to anyone who works in elections, whether it's the Secretary of State or a county clerk or a local clerk or staff in any of those offices, or even volunteer poll workers. So feel free to spread the word. We've created a digital toolkit. The information's on the screen there. And it has a lot of tools, things that you can share on social media, things that you can send to your colleagues, things you can even print and hang in your workplace. So just people know this is available. Hopefully you'll never need EOLDN assistance. That's our sincere hope. We're very proud to provide this, but we also acknowledge that it's kind of sad that a nonpartisan nonprofit has to provide a service like this. And we hope one day that it's no longer necessary. We should go, I think if the next slide has a QR code as well. Am I right? Or do we have it? There we go. The QR code, I think, takes you to the digital toolkit also, if you want to scan and follow that. So please do that. Please spread the word. If you'd ever like Angie or I to speak about this or any other issue, we're available. We love doing that. I've already spoken to one of the county clerks conference, to Justin and some of his colleagues, and it was fantastic. We are incredibly big fans of the work that you do, and we want you to know that we're here for you. You can reach out to us at any point in time. Even if you have questions, there's a help email there. It'll get to us. Even if it's not something that's directly related to EOLDN, you can get a hold of us, ask us about it. If you have good ideas like the one Marie brought up, feel free to bring them to us. We're always interested in good ideas, because ultimately we're going to need to rely upon a lot of accurate, trustworthy information to beat back the tides of disinformation that we know we're going to see in the coming, not just 11 or so months, but actually probably more like 13 and a half months, 14 months, as we head all the way through into the beginning of 2025. So with that, just thank you all for being on this, and spread the word and let us know how we can help.